All right, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Jamie Cox. I'm the Public Services Librarian here. We're very excited to have Diana Gratzek here, local author who's done some local research as well. If it's all right with you, I'm going to read your bio and let everybody know who you are. All right. She was born in Leavenworth, Kansas in 1955, the fourth and youngest child of Henry and Roberta Adkins Gratzek. Her family moved to Bruceville, Knox County, Indiana in 1959 after her father's retirement from the Army. After graduating from North Knox High School, Diana attended Vincennes University, where she received an Associate of Science in Business Administration. Continuing her education at the University of Evansville, she received a Bachelor of Science in Accounting. Before retiring in 2019, she worked in the accounting field for 46 years. Always interested in her ancestry, Diana began researching her family history in 1994. She has compiled a comprehensive family tree, including extensive research of Polish, Czech, and German records. For more than 25 years, she assisted numerous individuals in their genealogical questions and research. For almost 7 years, Diana has researched the lives of those with ties to Knox County that paid the ultimate sacrifice during World War II. By honoring their memory, their sacrifice should never be forgotten. Her book, Gold Stars of Knox County, Indiana, is a 2-volume set. Volume 1 was published in January 2024. Volume 2 has a scheduled publication later this month or early December. And we know that your research was very valuable to us as we used it when we hosted the Americans in the Holocaust exhibit this past spring. It provided information for a poster we had on display to honor the veterans here. We're very thankful for that. And we're excited to hear you talk more about your book.
Thank you very much. Good morning. If any of you have questions while I'm doing my presentation, please just, say them and I'll stop my presentation and answer. Growing up, the daughter of a 20-year Army veteran who served in both World War II and Korea, I was always wanting to author a book honoring the members of the military. The decision to focus on World War II was influenced by one of the casualties of war, my maternal uncle, Harold Maurice Adkins. He was born in Knox County and yes, he was born in Knox County. As a youngster, I remember accompanying my grandmother to the cemetery to put flowers on his grave. And while we walked there, she would always tell me stories of Harold growing up. He was quite the practical joker, so she always had something to say about him.
Uh-oh. Oh no.
There you go. My book, Gold Star of Knox County, Indiana, contains a series of biographies of those individuals with ties to Knox County who paid the ultimate sacrifice during World War II. And this is my first book. And the lovely woman on the very front cover here is a picture of my mom at 16 with her brother Harold. The picture was taken in April of 1944, and it was the last time she ever saw her brother because he was killed 7 months later while serving in France. There are 111, and that's Harold, and that's my mom and Harold. There are 111 biographies included in Volume 1 and 97 biographies in Volume 2. The first volume includes those casualties with the surname of A through L. The second volume contains the surnames M through Z and is scheduled to be released later this month or in early December. Each biography chronicles the honorees' family members' education, work history before entering the service, as well as their service record and interment location. In most cases, a picture is included with each biography. It was my intention to allow the reader to understand the lives these individuals had before going to war, aspirations that were never realized because their life was cut short, so we could live in the free society we live in today. In 1998, I read a book that inspired me to learn more about those that served in World War II. Tom Brokaw, who was one of my most respected broadcast journalists, penned a book, The Greatest Generation. Originally purchased as a Christmas gift for my mother, it was well read before she ever unwrapped it on Christmas Day. In June 1984, Brokaw was inspired to write the book after attending the 40th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. He was so moved after hearing the personal accounts of those in the invasionary forces, he spent the next 10 years compiling personal accounts of those who served, from their coming of age during the Great Depression to their service and sacrifice during the war. One of my favorite quotes from his book was, "These men and women fought not for fame and recognition, but because it was the right thing to do." Using Brokaw's idea of compiling individual stories into one book around a common theme, Gold Stars of Knox County, Indiana was born. The individual backgrounds of those included in the book are diverse, but when they were all called, they all served. Some died in the battlefield, some in a tragic accident, and others of disease. No matter the circumstances of how they perished, they were all heroes, not because they died, but because they knew they could and they went anyway. The term Gold Star families is a modern reference that comes from the service flag displayed in the windows during the war. These flags were first displayed by families in World War I. The flag included a blue star for every immediate family member that was serving in the armed services in the United States. If that loved one died, the blue star was replaced by a gold star. This allowed members of the community to know the price that family had paid in the pursuit of freedom. Knox County, as with many localities in the country, had a very highly active Gold Star Mothers group. In 1936, it was declared the last Sunday in September was declared Gold Star Mother's Day to honor these individuals. In 2011, the name was amended to Gold Star Mothers and Family Day. In the preface of the books, I tried to highlight what Knox County was doing to support the war effort. Volume 1's preface acknowledges those families that had 5 or more family members serving in the military. The John A. Ramsey family proudly displayed 7 stars in their window with 7 of their 10 children serving in the war. That included 6 sons and 1 daughter. Other families that had 5 serving in the war were the Charles Jackson family, John Hennon family, Lewis Holt family, Frank Lieberman family, and the William Riley Mullins family. Volume 2 highlights the programs conducted in the county that directly supported the war effort. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, there were at least 21 military personnel from Knox County stationed on the island. Luckily, all survived the attack. Within the days that followed, the county established neighborhood initiatives which allowed civilians an opportunity to support the war effort. The Knox County chapter of the Red Cross, as part of the nationwide program entitled Knit Your Bit, organized volunteers to provide knitted garments and surgical items to support the soldiers and civilian refugees. Knitting classes were held at City Hall and Vincennes. Knitters were provided with detailed standardized knitting patterns to ensure uniformity of garments, with military providing the yarn. Within a week after the attack on Pearl Harbor, over 43 women's organizations were participating locally. Sweaters, socks, mufflers, helmets, fingerless mittens, toe covers, and stump covers were knitted by the volunteers. One of the most memorable posters to encourage participation into the program was "Remember Pearl Harbor, Pearl Harder." Red Cross volunteers nationwide knitted over 19 million garments for active and wounded military personnel by the end of the war. A victory garden had multi-purposes, freed up agricultural resources for the war effort, reduced pressure on transportation networks by growing food locally, and most importantly, it boosted civilian morale and patriotism by allowing the participants to feel they were doing their part to support the war effort. In Knox County, the Victory Garden Committee was chaired by Lewis Webb. Individuals who registered their Victory Garden in the county were given a guide prepared by the committee. The guide was designated to assist gardeners in planting, insect control, canning, and preservation. By the end of the war, Victory Gardens throughout the country had grown an estimated 10 million tons of produce. Purchasing war bonds was promoted as the best way to exhibit your patriotism. The cost of a war bond was $18.75. At its maturity, 10 years later, it could be redeemed for $25. Having just emerged from the Great Depression, most families did not have those funds available to purchase a war bond. Therefore, the U.S. Treasury created the War Stamp Savings Program. In the county, carriers of the Vincent Sun Commercial were designated as defense agents, and they were authorized to sell these stamps with their weekly newspaper subscription collection. Each stamp cost 10 cents, and when they purchased the first stamp, they were given a book, and when they had 187 stamps in the book, they could take it to a local bank and pay a nickel and then redeem it for a war bond. The first week of their campaign, which was December 21st, 1941, the local carriers had sold 1,275 stamps. During the duration of the war, Vincent Sun Commercial Carriers sold $48,243.95 of war stamps, an amount equal to $855,000 today. In both books, I chose to include people from the county who served as prisoners of war and later liberated. The list shows the date of capture, the camp in which they were held, and their liberation date. Although those listed all survived the war, many were subjected to brutal and inhumane treatment. Navy Seaman First Class Lowen Arnett was one of the longest serving, or was the longest serving POW from the county. Lowen was a prisoner of war from December 8th, 1941, when captured on Guam, to October 1st, 1945, when his Osaka, Japan prison camp was liberated by the Allies. It is hard to believe my research on the book began almost 7 years ago. The research and writing encompassed over 7,000 hours. Once I decided the structure of my book, I first photographed the war memorial slates at both the Vincent Cemetery and the courthouse, and compiled a list of those individuals that had died during the war. In researching the names on the memorials, I soon realized mistakes had been made. I was surprised to learn that 3 of the individuals listed on the memorial slates had never died. One reported missing, but later rejoined his unit. One had been a POW since the fall of Corregidor, but was never acknowledged by the Red Cross. And one had been seriously wounded, but recovered from his wounds. An additional 3 names were duplicated because of variations of the spelling of their name. 6 additional names were incorrectly spelled on the memorial slates, but they're still, they're still listed. I then read the Vincent Sun commercial from July 1st, 1941 through December 31st, 1945. In doing so, I compiled a database that includes the name of each person serving in the military when they were mentioned, containing over 40,000 entries and spanning 1,000 pages. The database is available at the McGrady-Brockman Building. And if you're researching a World War II individual, you can simply ask for the database and it will tell you what pages and dates of the Sun commercial the article appears in. Local newspaper accounts became a vital part of writing this book, as they were the primary source that detailed the inductions, the assignments, transfers, promotions, presentation of medals, notifications of wounds and death. In most cases, detailed military records were not available. On June 12, 1973, a disastrous fire at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis destroyed approximately 18 million official military personnel records of those that had just been discharged or died in service from 1912 to 1964. Although an estimated 80% of Army and Air Corps records were considered destroyed, I was only able to find one record of the 208 individuals in my book. So for me, it was a much higher percentage than 80. Once I completed the newspaper research, I began reaching out to the next of kin. I was somewhat disappointed with my first response rate only being about 45%. It has increased substantially, now over 70% with the second volume. And I don't know if it's because I've gotten better at asking the questions, or if they, I just had a better group of people to get information from. I completed my research by using resources such as Ancestry, Family Search, Fold-Free, Find a Grave. Before I began writing the biography, I completed a timeline on each honoree to determine if more research was needed. And being a historian and a genealogist, there's never enough that you can find, but at some point in time, you have to say, that's all I'm gonna find. In writing the individual biographies, I try to maintain the same basic structure in each: date and place of birth, names of parents and siblings, education, where they worked prior to entering the service, marriage and children, induction into the Army, units and locations in which they served, date and circumstances of their death, their final interment location, and the aftermath of their spouse and children. Because each biography was written as a standalone research tool, if one reads the entire book, they will encounter a great deal of redundancy. It is important to note that the biography of each individual documented in my books was dependent on the information that was available. The length of each biography does not infer that one honoree's accomplishments and sacrifices were less than another's. There are 4 families included in the book, with the heartbreaking distinction of having 2 gold stars in their window. Edward and Josie Goodman were the first parents to lose both sons in the war, their only children. They were later joined by Samuel and Dorothy Harris, Thomas and Leona Hartley, and James and Alice Leslie. A tragic event near the end of the war took the lives of 3 Knox County residents. Knowing the Allied invasion of the Philippines was imminent, the Japanese embarked 1,782 of their healthiest prisoners of war aboard the Japanese freighter Erasan Maru on October 11, 1944. They were transporting them from the Philippines, where they had been liberated, to work camps in Japan. 3 of the 1,782 aboard were county residents: John Franklin Casey, Joseph Albert Dawson, and Max Wellington Walker. All had been taken prisoners on May 6, 1942, with the fall of Corregidor, enduring the Bataan Death March, as well as brutal treatment at the hands of their captors. The Arasan Maru finally departed from Manila, Philippines on October 20th as part of a 17-ship convoy. On October 23rd, about 230 miles west of Luzon, Philippines, the convoy began picking up signals that there were American submarines in the area. They were ordered to break apart and sail to Formosa, which is Taiwan today. Not knowing there were Allied prisoners aboard the freighter, the submarine USS Shark torpedoed the Arasan Maru while in the South China Sea. In retaliations, the Japanese destroyers sunk the Shark and returned to the Arasan Maru to search for survivors. Severely damaged, the ship had remained afloat. Although the POWs were believed none to have been killed by the torpedo strikes, the Japanese only rescued their crew. Only 9 prisoners of the 1,700 aboard survived the attack. 5 escaped and made their way to China in one of the ship's 2 lifeboats and were reunited with Allied forces. The other 4 were later recaptured by the Japanese naval vessels, 1 dying the following day. All 3 Knox County residents were lost at sea. I don't know if any of you are sports fans, but I am a big sports fan. So when I found this article, I knew I had to include it in my book. Before dawn on March 19, 1945, Lieutenant Fred Stallcup Jr. was stationed aboard the USS Franklin. The ship had maneuvered within 50 miles of the Japanese mainland, closer than any US carrier during the war. Launching an airstrike against the mainland, she braced for retaliation. Hours later, a single Japanese dive bomber dropped 2 bombs, one hitting the flight deck and the other piercing the rear of the ship. The deck became an inferno, causing fuel tanks and ammunition explosions on the lower deck. The communication center was inoperative. Survivors worked feverishly to save those aboard. After 6 hours, the fires were extinguished and the survivors were evacuated. In the aftermath, the Franklin reported 870 men killed or missing and 487 wounded. Lieutenant Fred Stallcup, a Knox County resident, was one of the missing. His remains never recovered. What makes this story so unique was his twist of fate. When my research led me to this story, I knew I had a story not only of sacrifice of a young life taken too soon, but of destiny. John Robert Wooden, one of the most respected and celebrated NCAA coaches in basketball history, will always be linked to Fred Stallcup. They were both born in 1910 in a small Indiana town. They both excelled in sports in high school. They both attended Purdue University, where they were star athletes. They both were members of the same fraternity. They both enlisted in the Navy and achieved the rank of lieutenant. They were both physical fitness instructors tasked with training naval aviators in Iowa City, Iowa. In December 1944, Wooden received his orders to report to the USS Franklin. Visiting his family in Indiana before reporting to the ship, Wooden was stricken with acute appendicitis. Because Navy policy stated there must be a 30-day recovery period after surgery before reporting for active duty, the decision was made to replace Wooden, an as athletic director on the Franklin. Lieutenant Stalcup was chosen as his replacement. Wooden didn't realize until several years later that that Stalcup, the man he met at Purdue several years before, was the lieutenant who replaced him on the Franklin. Wooden lived to be 99 years old and is celebrated in the Hall of Fame. Over the past 7 years, I had the pleasure of meeting and speaking with relatives of those included in the book. My hope is they feel I've honored the memory of their family member by putting their stories in writing. Their legacies will always live on. Thank you.
Do you have any favorite memories from interviewing the families?
You know, I do, because they were just so gracious. Many of them, you know, did not live around here, but if they were going to be anywhere near the area, they contacted me and said, we would love to meet you. And, you know, there were hugs and there were stories, and it was truly the best part of writing this book. Because, I mean, as you can tell, this wasn't a book that made you happy, because they all died, they all perished in some way. But the fact that it was a positive experience for the family members became a positive experience for me.
What was some of the more difficult hurdles you had when doing research, besides like finding names misspelled?
There were, because the records, the military records were destroyed, it was dependent on the families getting the information to the newspapers. Now, the military, if there was a severe wounding or death, the military would notify the newspapers. But if it were things like promotions or a change of unit and that kind of thing, it was up to the families to notify the newspapers. And some families were just not as good at it as others. So, you know, there's some of the individuals in the book that may only have a page, and it doesn't mean that they had less of an impact on what they did. It simply meant the information wasn't there. And I hated that, because I think I shortchanged them.
Still very nice to honor them, however, even a short mention.
Exactly.
Did you find that anybody you interviewed that you were like, oh, I already know you? Like,
well, actually, I grew up in Bruceville after my family moved here from Leavenworth. And I grew up with a girl that I always knew her as Karen Kofer. Mm-hmm. And I started doing my research, and lo and behold, her name was actually bogus. She was a daughter of one of the honorees in the book, and I didn't have a clue. So I called a friend of mine who knew Karen well and said, well, before I contact her, I want to make sure that she knew that, you know, she was not a Kofer, that she was a bogus, because that's the last thing I'd want to do is to upset somebody. And Sandy said, oh, absolutely, she knew, but it just made it easier to go by her stepfather's name, because, you know, she was 2 years old when her dad died.
Yes. What would you say were some of the more difficult aspects, you know, not just with your research, you know, getting these biographies from these men who gave their lives? What would you say was the most difficult part about putting this book together?
I will have to be honest. There were times that I had to set the book aside and just kind of regroup a little bit, because some of these stories are very sad and very tragic. But actually, at my first book signing, I did have not a confrontation, but I did have somebody that tell me that one of these should not have been included in the book. And that is, I chose to include the Merchant Marines in my book. And in the 1940s, during World War II, Merchant Marines were not considered part of the military. But after I started reading about how difficult, I mean, their percentage of those that died as merchant marines were higher than any of the other military. And, you know, basically they were transporting goods and did not have any protection. I mean, it was just one ship out there by itself, and they really didn't have any protection. So yes, I just made the decision to include the merchant marines, and that was not to everybody's favor, but you know, when they write their book, they won't include the merchant marines.
But I mean, they still gave their lives serving their country.
They absolutely did. And they were transporting, you know, food and gasoline and oil and stuff to the military. So yes, they had a very dangerous job.
So have you had conversations with the families after publication?
I have, and overwhelmingly, it has been very supportive. Probably the only, and it wasn't even a negative feedback, probably the only thing that somebody asked me is after his father died, his mother married several times. And he said, I didn't know that would be in the book. And I mean, he wasn't, you know, mad or anything like that. He just didn't know if it had a place in the book. And I told him, I said, yes, but you need to look at the fact that maybe she did that because, you know, your father, she could never find somebody like your father or something like that. But yeah, he was surprised. I don't think he was angry. He was surprised that I included, but I did try to include in the book the aftermath of spouses and children, you know, just where they were and what they did.
I was wondering if any of the families started contacting each other to share their own memories.
That's interesting. Not that I know of.
Do you have another question? No, I was just judging.
Somewhere in my camera, I have more than one picture of the memorial in Sanborn. It includes my uncle's name, who is in the list, and as well as some others. I think there are 5 or 6 Sanborn, and I think it might include like Westphalia or wherever right around in there as well. I would be glad to send that to you if I can ever find it, if you're interested.
Absolutely. And what was your uncle's name?
Everett Sanders Jr.
Oh, it's in the second book. But as a matter of fact, when we're done here, if you'd like to come up and read I have the proof copy, not for sale, but I do have him included. So you're more than welcome to come up and look at the information I have on him.
People are wanting to get your first volume. Where can they go to find it?
They can either contact me, and I'd be happy to give like my email address. The library, the Vincent's Public Library, has copies there. They just need to ask for them. They have them under the circulation desk there. And I will also have them on my signing of the second book. I'll also have my first volume there available as well.
When and where is your second signing?
Well, I haven't scheduled it yet because the books are supposed to be, they've gone through all the hurdles and they're supposed to be here on the day before Thanksgiving. But I won't schedule my signing because the first volume was supposed to be there at a certain date, and it was like 5 weeks later when they arrived. So I don't want to, you know, schedule one and then have to cancel it. I'm in hopes by Christmas, before Christmas.
There will be an announcement in the paper or something
There
when
will
you're
be an
signing.
announcement in there. I've already contacted, find out who to contact.
There you go. We'll keep reading the Vincent's on commercial so we can know when your second signing is. Any other questions?
Well, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much. It's valuable work you've done.
I'm gonna have bookmarks up here too. If anybody would like to bookmark, please feel free.